We're going to start off today talking about food policy on the most local level. And before we dive into the conversation, I just want to start off with a few stats just to tee this up. More than 1.2 million New York City residents, or 14.4%, are food insecure. New York City residents make up half of all food insecure people living in New York State. And the city's food insecurity rate is 12 percentage points higher than the national rate. For example, that translates to 1 in 5 children relying on soup kitchens or soup pantries. I'm going to be breaking for questions halfway through since I know this is just such an engaged audience. So as we kick off, we're going to be talking about policy, but that sometimes misses how personal food really is. So I want to start off with your roots. What was dinner like at home when you were growing up?
The typical Southern diet. My mom and dad was from Alabama, Mobile and Cecil, Alabama. Fried, sugar, oil, fat. If it didn't have all of the toxic things in it, it was not sold in good food. And so you could just pick from the group. It was a very Southern heavy diet.
You were eating at home most nights with your family, or?
In South Jamaica, Queens, dining out was dining in your backyard. That was eating at home all the
time. My dad was a New York City motorman, now known as train operators, and my mom's job was to take that salary and stretch it 42 ways from Sunday to provide for the 4 boys. So I'm Sicilian on both sides, so we would eat what they called back in the day peasant food, which is pasta with every vegetable under the sun. So while we were eating lentils early on, we also were eating pasta and at least a loaf or 2 loaves of bread. The one thing I will remember, though, about growing up is the decision my mother made when I was around 10 that there'd be no more soda in the house. And soda became iced tea, which probably had more sugar at the time. But eventually it became water. And when my dad really started getting sick, salt also was eliminated. But we ate the typical Italian fare, and I thought pasta was one of the staples of every meal.
You're Sicilian?
We're related, my friend.
We're brothers.
So we had fish and vegetables, but no seasoning. I think my mother didn't know what seasoning was. It was really bland. And then something really awful, which is Sara Lee. I don't know if you know that, but when I was growing up, it came in a tin and you just heat it up.
Pound cake.
No, worse than pound cake. No, not the pound cake. It was actual, supposedly vegetables, supposedly meat,
Yeah,
and supposedly, I don't know what it was actually, and I loved it. So I ate pounds of it. You know, all you have to do is just stick it in the oven for like 10 minutes, and it heated up. I can't imagine the preservatives that were in it. So that's what we ate until we realized, and I was in my 20s before I realized, really, if it's not fresh fruits and vegetables, don't eat it.
Good morning, everyone. My parents are from Puerto Rico, so you could all, I mean, we're the complete opposite of Gale's family. There was seasoning even in the eggs. Sofrito, adobo, and the scrambled eggs. You had lechon and rice and beans and all kinds of vegetables, and everything was fried. With regards to soda, I mean, we only made that decision, Hilda and I, with our sons, who are grown men now, maybe 10 years ago. Growing up in my family, and the typical Puerto Rican family, you have things like ham and cheese sandwiches with maltas, which is that malt soda. Sometimes you mix that with orange juice, and they call it ponche. And so you could only imagine that the psychology of Puerto Rican families, and it runs the gamut in different cultures and different ethnic groups. Eating and overindulging and over-seasoning and frying everything and putting more and more on the plate was really an act and in term of endearment, is an act of endearment. And little did families in our communities know that what they're really doing is hurting the people that they say they love.
So let's get this framework going, and we can really just dive into the conversation. How does the New York City budget process work compared with the state, and what strategies have been most effective to gain support for food programs in your boroughs? dive in.
How does the budget process work?
And how have you been able to advocate for food programs in your boroughs effectively?
That's a great question, because the borough presidents, we have to be extremely creative with our allocations. We get a lot of capital dollars, brick and mortar, around about 50-something million a year. But the discretionary dollars is a smaller amount, and we must be creative with the large number of programs, the various nonprofits. In New York City alone, you have about 35,000 nonprofits, and they're vying for money all over. So we must be creative in the dollars, and it's really by advocacy and extremely aggressive advocacy. Some of the things we did in Brooklyn, and now it's around the city, is the Meatless Monday program, where we are trying to wean our children off of processed meat, which is a type 1 carcinogen based on the WHO, and we want them to learn how to eat healthy fruits and vegetables. And I had to put the initial seed money into those projects, and some of the growing green in our schools, you put the initial seed money, and then you hope that the larger city at large would catch on to the programs. But we have to really be creative, because of the discretionary dollars is different from our capital spending.
So in New York City, we have what we call a strong mayor type of government, where a lot of the power is vested in the executive,
Very strong.
which is why some folks are running for mayor. So when you're on the outside, whether you're a member of the city council or a borough president, you're kind of fighting against the tide, and you have to enlist the support of His Honor and the administration, and that's really frustrating. When we got to Borough, when we got to Borough Hall in 2014, we took an unprecedented step, and that was I went out and I hired a physician because I wanted to make health and wellness part of our agenda. It just was where my values sit, and so we go outside of government. I know my colleagues feel the same way. As much as I can, I want to do initiatives that don't intersect with government, because that means intersecting with an agency that too often wants to throw a roadblock in our way. So we try to do a lot of things offline, outside of government. But there are many times when you have to work with the administration and you need their support. And I'll give you a really timely example, forgive the pun. California just passed governor just signed the legislation after Governor Brown had vetoed it previously about school start times. It's a huge issue for some of us. High school students, as you all know, they're not meant to be awake and at that time of the morning. I mean, it's just their circadian rhythms, their biology. And in New York City, we're spending between expense dollars and capital $60 billion a year to try to educate some of our students when they're not ready for it. So we have lobbied with the chancellor, and there's a pilot program that they started this year. So sometimes you are hostage to that process. You have to sit down with the administration and the commissioners to get them to change policy. As often as you can, we try to go outside of that, and that's what we've done on a lot of the health and wellness stuff.
Well, this is a great question. I mean, there are a couple issues, as you heard, in terms of the budget. What we can do is allocate money for hydroponics in schools, for roof gardens, for community gardens. We can do all of that. That helps, I hope, get more fresh fruits and vegetables into the mouths of individuals. And we also have a program that we work with, Grow NYC. I was around when the green market started, and I'm a huge supporter of fresh fruits and vegetables, and I want to support the farmers upstate. So that, to me, is how, as Jimmy Oddo indicated, you can go around a little bit and just do what you think is best. So when I was in the city council with this amazing member to my right, we had passed a bill called Local Law 50. I'm not saying it mandates that the city purchase locally, meaning from the state of New York, because we can't do that legally, but we can say, for goodness sake, it's much better to have apples, lettuce, onions from the state of New York and not from California or elsewhere. So we've been pushing that very slowly. It's a pain in the neck to get the correction, and a health department and daycare and senior centers and so on to purchase locally, but that's something that we've been working on. The second issue is just trying to get for the seniors, because there are more and more of us in the city of New York. We have a bag, $8. You can buy it all around the borough of Manhattan. Again, all from Green Market and Grow NYC. So I think we're all, pushing. We want to make sure that composting is in the schools. That's something that I think does help us because it doesn't go to the landfill, keeps us healthier. All of these issues go around to a certain extent working with government. You have to work with DOE, you have to work with correction to get them to purchase, but you can do it with advocacy, and that's, I think, what we're trying to do. What we're missing is the data. We have not been able to pass a bill that says we need the nutrition data from the Department of Education. We have not been able to get the agencies to say, how much are you purchasing locally? We have some laws that say they're supposed to, or that they would, but it hasn't actually happened. And I think as somebody who passed the open data bill in the city council, I want the data so that we know whether or not this is really happening.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I asked this too because I think people want to know how customizable really per borough these types of programs are.
Yeah, so let's be honest here. The borough presidencies are not what they used to be when you had the Board of Estimates. So, Chloe, when you asked the question about the city budget versus the state budget, what we get is based on a formula. We get capital funding. And when Eric says that we have to be creative, that's exactly what we've been able to do in my borough. My borough is not the Bronx of the 70s and the 80s anymore. We've seen a huge turnaround on economic development, job creation, housing, crime reduction. But one of the areas that still we need to work on is that of health. If you look at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, every year they do a report. And in that report, unfortunately, since I've been the borough president the last 10 years, we are number 62 of the 62 counties as it relates to health indicators, meaning we're in last place. That's the bad news. The good news is that we've been able to do real nuanced things, and that when you compare us to ourselves over the last 10 years, we're healthier than we get healthier and healthier every year. So, number one, 62, we started a social media campaign. For those of you who are on social media, go to hashtag not 62. And you'll see how people are posting exercises, how to use weight machines, and how to they post different recipes so that we can get healthier as a borough. We've also used our leverage when it comes to housing. So the one thing that the borough presidents do have, whether it's in the ULURP process, we have a say. We work with our city council delegation. Part of our capital funding, many of us put it into housing. So if you are a developer, if you're someone who wants my support, so we want you to maximize on the Fresh program. And where we have food deserts, you see more and more supermarkets. We've also been innovative when, for instance, when Fresh Direct wanted to come, they were thinking of leaving New York City, now they're in the Bronx. When we said that we wanted them in the Bronx, we saw that they didn't deliver every place in the Bronx. Now they deliver in every community in the Bronx, not just Riverdale. But we also started a pilot program, which the U.S. Department of Agriculture has now implemented, or had 6 other states, where they're allowing for EBT card holders to be able to purchase groceries online. Prior to our initiative, believe it or not, people who were on public assistance could not purchase anything online. Now they can purchase food, and if you are a senior citizen, if you're someone who's disabled, if you live in a food desert now, you can have fresh produce delivered at your doorstep, and they waive the delivery fees. We've done things like, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then lastly, on the educational front in schools, please look up the Green Bronx Machine. Steve Ritz, my buddy, I always say he's kooky, but I love him. But we've been able to allocate funding so that our kids are not only having salad bars in their schools, but they're also now having programs that intermingle science and math with the sciences, with hydroponics, and they're growing fresh produce, spices, and vegetables, fruits and vegetables. But they're also now, they have like behavior bucks, And whenever you do well, you get the behavior bucks, you go to the school. Some of us had a Geo store back in the day. I don't want to date myself, where you bought pretzels and lollipops and everything. Now you can buy a smoothie in PS 55 and other schools through this program. And the kids who are purchasing this, they're purchasing, but other kids are now, they're the ones who are mixing it in with stationary bicycles with the blenders right in front, so they're getting exercise while they're doing it. So we're doing things like that.
Really great. So tell us about what's one program that you've maybe wanted to see funded that you haven't been able to get because of lack of resources?
There's a couple, and I think it's so important what Rubén stated is that when in the place of food, we are just so wrong as a city and really as a country. I was just in Orlando, Florida, speaking to 1,400 physicians around the globe who are looking at my Bellevue project. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes.
That's in Manhattan, I think.
But I'm a global thinker. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. I lost my sight in my left eye. I had permanent nerve damage in my hands and feet. The doctor told me I was going to be blind in a year, and I was going to lose some fingers and toes. And instead of going on the insulin that they wanted me to go on, I became scientific, and I went to Google and Googled reversing diabetes. And I learned the power of switching my diet, and I went to a whole food, plant-based diet, and in 3 weeks, my vision came back, my nerve damage went away, my diabetes went in remission. And my 80-year-old mother, who was diabetic for 15 years, 7 years on insulin, 15 years taking 9 different medications for different ailments, Mom joined me, and in 2 months, she was off her insulin and went off 9 of her medications. And everyone in this room, we may be from different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different cultures, but everyone in this room knows someone that's going through a chronic disease if you're not going through it yourself. And so in this journey, what I learned that across the globe, our healthcare system is not sustainable, and we are feeding the crisis. So even when people go to food pantry, we are putting food in their bags that is causing their healthcare crisis. Government should not be feeding the crisis. And when you go to schools and you're selling children processed meat, I got the mayor to stop purchasing processed meat in this city. Unbelievable. 50% beef reduction. We're going to, we have our hospitals now going to plant-based. People go to the hospital for surgery for colon cancer, food-related disease, and then when they get out of surgery, they're eating the same food that caused it in the first place. We are feeding our babies in ACS who go through crises. We're feeding them food that causes the crises. That's one of our top feeders, ACS. Department of Education, we were feeding our babies molded pizza, bread, processed food, processed rice, food that was killing them. So when you hear some of the programs we're doing, we're reversing disease, and it is really important. So my Bellevue project, 173 people have signed up to participate in lifestyle medicine where you're reversing your disease, not living with disease. We have 600 people on the waiting list.
Wow.
The preliminary data is remarkable. We're changing how we deal with medicine throughout the entire globe. I am like the original disruptor. I'm disrupting the pharmaceutical industry that they're no longer going to have our families hooked on drugs throughout their entire life. And so food is so powerful. It is not just what you have on the end of your fork. It is how you identify yourself.
And to your point, too, I mean, it's so interdisciplinary. It really touches so many other societal issues, and it can be the cause, really. So, and thank you for that, just the powerful story.
So let me just say, by the way, it's nice to be allowed into NYU. 35 years ago, you wouldn't allow me in here. But it's okay because I spent 4 great years in the Bronx at Fordham U.
There you go.
You heard Rubén tell you all the great things he's doing. And Eric is an absolute inspiration. When Eric starts talking about health and wellness, I told him this, I will run through the bleeping wall. and Gale lives it too. So I'm really proud of the borough presidents and the values we have on this issue. There was a story many years ago before Mayor Koch died. There was a story in the Times where he was talking about he's got all of his arrangements in place. And he said that he's got to deal with the good Lord, and that is he will take them all at once or he won't take them at all. No salami tactics. And it's the first time I've ever heard that phrase, salami tactics. And I have to tell you, immediately I thought of my father, who lost his right leg below the knee. And that was the last of many blows, and probably the worst because psychologically it was devastating. It was not diabetes, but I saw the impact of it. Diabetes is an insidious disease. It takes you bit by bit, and then it kills you prematurely. And so to answer your question about one program that we want to advance, and you want to talk about turning into a fanboy, I was sitting out in the front before an hour ago, and I was like, my God, that's Dr. Hyman right there outside. And it was like I saw Mickey Mantle. And I was picking his brain, and he was like, let me go and let me leave the couch, young man. But I asked him about something called Verta Health, and he said good things about it. And this is we get to see the downside of social media. It is a cesspool most times. But following, I think it's Lori Shemek, she tweeted something about diabetes and Verta Health. And I said to my staff, what is this? Let's check it out. And that led to a call, and that led to another call. And it's basically a ketogenic diet to get them back off that path and onto a different path. And they're in a 4-year clinical trial. And we are trying to do a pilot program on Staten Island. And to go back to your first question, I can't do it on my own. So we have a conference call with the Department of Health and the Office of Labor Relations because it ties in Emblem Health and the insurer and everything. But as to Eric's point, and I'll close with this, I see my job on this is, I know what the status quo is, and the status quo sucks. So my job is to be an instigator, throw out ideas, force the city off the status quo. And I'm optimistic that, something like Verta Health, let's try it. If it doesn't work, let's try something else.
Right.
Because I'm looking at the numbers, I'm looking at the data points in my home borough, Staten Island, across the city, across the country. And we are losing the fight, and it's a fight that Eric embodies. We can win.
I think it is a great topic. New York City purchases more food than anything but the U.S. Armed Services. So we are purchasing more than any state, any city, and we're number 2 in the United States. So if we're purchasing not just for the 1.1 school children, but all the other agencies that you can think of, correction being a big one, then why in the world are we not purchasing locally? So if you could think of the one program, because that would not only help the wonderful folks who come from the Catskills and come down to the Green Market, but would help those in way upstate who have farms, who have wonderful product, because they can't get on a regular basis down to the Green Market. So I'm really frustrated by the fact that we have not put more energy. Yes, the Department of Education has a Meatless Monday, which helps in terms of the fruits and vegetables, and they have supposedly a New York State Thursday, but I think it's like a friggin' cookie sometime that's baked in maybe, Queens, because she's not here, right?
I know, I was bummed about that too. I really wanted to ask about street vendors in Flushing particularly, but it's okay.
And so what I'm saying is we have to do a lot better. And the issue then becomes scratch cooking. When you are in a senior center, it is absolutely true that if you have the smell of in a homeless shelter or in a senior center or anywhere, you need to smell food. The notion that everything is catered and comes in from another kitchen in a box is not appropriate. So how do we get back to scratch cooking, whether it has the wonderful, fabulous smell of a Puerto Rican cooking or my mother's boring fish? It's fresh, it's fresh. And the question is, how do you get that? So in the schools, I do think there's efforts that we just heard about. There's a group called Wellness in the Schools also. They're in 128 schools. They're keeping within the budget that the USDA mandates, and they're still cooking fresh and healthy. So there's something wrong that we're not able to figure out how to do the food that gets to those who are most vulnerable, hospitals being part of it, of course. So I guess my number one issue is the city of New York, in its massive purchasing power, has got to find a way to purchase locally. Now, what I get told told, oh, Gale, what happens if we run out of lettuce, because the farmers can't do it in the month of February? Well, for goodness sake, then you could purchase from another state like California. But there's no way. That's not impossible. Figure out in advance. Oh, Gale, I can't possibly do that because I have to plan my menu 6 months in advance at the senior center. Come on, you can figure out how to do this. It's not rocket science. So I am wishing that we all figure out and advocate for fresh food for New Yorkers.
Gale,
So
I'm so happy you brought that up, Gale, because especially in terms of just climate change mitigation, that's something that so many huge companies are able to do, and supply chain work is probably the hardest, but it is, if you can put the work in it, you should really be able to get it done.
So, I just want to say this, that before any of that, at least in my borough, we have a couple of conundrums that we have to solve. For instance, how could my borough be the hungriest borough and have the highest obesity rate? That's complicated. We have to find a way to communicate that and find a way to educate people. My borough has 1 out of every 5. So we've seen, since I've been the borough president, the unemployment rate decreased by more than half. We went from 14.3% to 5.5%, over 100,000 more Bronxites working today than the first day that I took office. 1 out of every 4 adults that has a job is working in the healthcare industry. So it's amazing because whether you're a custodian or a doctor and anything in between, every single day, 25% of the adults in my borough, they're seeing and working around sick people. So you would think that they would want to make sure that they take care of themselves, and you would think that they would then go and educate their families. You would think that if we had some of the most world-renowned healthcare facilities, and we do in the Bronx, are they there to prevent us from being sick, or are they there? So there's a conundrum. Are they there because, because they know that we're sick? Even further, 38% of the people who live in the Bronx today were not born or did not live in the Bronx 25 years ago, except that 30 years ago, 35 years ago, we had the same health disparities. So is it something in the air, in the water? These are all things that we got to solve first. In terms of government, we can purchase healthier foods in the Department of Education. But I also believe that with programs like the Green Bronx Machine, we're getting it right. We had it wrong. We thought that we had to get to the adults. It is the children.
Right.
And we have to make healthy eating, and we have to make it fun. We have to make that part of the curriculum, not just purchasing food for their lunch. So if we're going to teach them science, we're going to teach them math, the way that the Green Bronx, so the city could do more of that. And then lastly, if we put so much money into housing, please look up Arbor House. Arbor House is in the South Bronx. It's a public-private partnership. We did it with NYCHA. We did it with a developer. It's a totally enclosed greenhouse. I put funding into it. We made it work financially for the developer. As we move forward, as we continue to do more housing, as we continue to have these programs, this is a way that, at least locally, the people now in forest projects and in McKinley houses, and they're at Arbor House in the surrounding community, they, year-round, are purchasing spices and fruits and vegetables grown right up in the roof of that building. And we need to do more and more of that. We make it fun, we make it accessible, and we're able, the other thing that we've been able to do is work with chefs so that different groups, Puerto Ricans, African American, soul food or whatever, how you can cook your favorite dish healthier, in a healthier way, without sacrificing your palate.
And that's so important because technology is there. When we talk about purchasing locally, we could do it right here. In Brooklyn, we have at one of our Whole Foods, we have rooftop garden. We have almost 14,000 acres of roof space. We can grow our food. We have a project with Democracy Academy in Brooklyn where we use a partnership with Farm Shelf, where they have these little pods about the size of a fridge where you can grow vegetables. The children have identified a nitrogen development that's a food desert. They're growing the food and they're delivering it to the residents in the nitrogen development. Every school in our city should have a rooftop garden while children can grow their food on a rooftop using hydroponics, serve it down in the cafeteria, learn about the science of the food, the power of spices. When you look at some of the spices in a list of spices, our children in school should learn about every spice. Many of the spices are more healthy than the actual food that they are eating. And lastly, as Rubén just pointed out, that's so huge that we're missing. It's not about caloric consumption. We're caught up on this mindset as if your belly is full, we solve the crisis. No, it's about nutrition. If that mother is not receiving the right folic acid, iron, and other items while that baby is being carried during those 0 to 3 years, then that child is going to grow up with cognitive issues, emotional intelligence issues. So we are feeding crises from the time of infancy, and we are continuing that crisis. Every major crisis you see in this city and country starts on the nutritional malfunctions that happens when a child is carried in his mother's womb, and we just continue that right now. It's not about just feeding people. It's about giving them what this machine we call a body needs in order for it to function. And if we don't shift that paradigm, if we just think that, okay, little Johnny received his 2,100 calories and we did our job, that's wrong. We have to change what we think about food and the power of food. It's the right food, and we're not doing that right now. We're feeding the crisis.
Including the mental health crisis, because the connection between food and mental health
Without a
is
doubt.
becoming more obvious by the day.
Oh,
Without a
sure. I mean,
doubt.
gut, brain health. Yeah. Anyway, so I want to take a pause right there and actually break for questions. So that we have around 10 minutes left, and I know this is just an amazing panel. Yeah, right over there. We have runners throughout, so come with some great questions. We have one right here, one right there.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I work with a company called Brigade, and we put chefs into school kitchens. And I'm actually here working in the Bronx on a scratch cooking pilot program. So currently we're in 2 schools. And to Gale's point about getting scratch food back into all of the schools, I just want to tell you a couple of our challenges and ask you how you can help us. So
It has to do with what? I'm sorry?
a couple of the challenges that we have in doing that and see how you can help us.
Okay.
So I think we all here agree that getting scratch cooked food back in schools is what needs to happen. But when it takes almost 2 years to get a new ingredient, like a whole wheat flour or a sweet potato, that becomes very difficult. On top of that, after getting the ingredients, then the schools need the equipment to process them, the staff to do that, and then most importantly, the training for the staff. And all of that, of course, costs money. So what can you guys do to help us with those things?
Well, I just want to start by saying we've been trying to get real kitchens because so many of the schools just have heat-up kitchens. They don't have a real kitchen. And the second thing is is to figure out how you purchase differently and still stay within the USDA concept of money. So it's a really hard challenge, but what we've been doing in Manhattan is twofold. One, making sure that even if you have a scratch kitchen, don't have a scratch kitchen, you have a real salad bar, not a salad bar that nobody wants to eat. We're doing the same thing in the senior centers. They have the same problem. They do not all have kitchens, and they don't all have the staffing. So all I can tell you is we need to start with the equipment and start with the purchasing. And we've done about 5 kitchens in Manhattan. But it is a huge difference for the wonderful DC 37 staff. They get paid very little, and to make sure that they too are part of the solution and not feeling that they are being second-guessed.
If you can invite me to see what you guys are doing in the schools that you're in the Bronx, I would love to see that, and maybe I can connect you with some of the other programs in other schools, that, like Steve Ritz, I don't know if you know him, and what they're doing at PS 55 and in other schools. With regards to capital funding, the truth is that when we allocate, and I've allocated almost $100 million to schools in the Bronx in capital funding, and that's all predicated on what the principal wants. We have different consortia at every level. We all come together twice a year, especially around budgeting, right before budgeting, and the principals tell me what they need. The sad part is that many of the principals feel like in their mind that there are other priorities for capital allocation, but going back to Eric's point, all of the things that they have to deal with their student body stems from the fact that their children aren't getting the nutrition that they need. So maybe we need to have everybody recalibrate and start to think, and certainly I can advocate to the DOE about whatever it is that you need. With regards to produce or ingredients, we have the largest produce market in the Western Hemisphere in the Bronx, and I don't know why the DOE and the city of New York doesn't capitalize more on that. So I look forward to, moving this conversation forward, helping you out.
First, I want to say thank you. You guys are phenomenal. The work you're doing is really inspiring. My name is Fran Soren, and I'm part of Peter Diamandis Abundance A360 group, and we're a group of international entrepreneurs trying to help solve the problems of the world, the major problems. And I'm very focused on food and really wondering, cities notoriously, government-wise, aren't future thinkers. So if we all agree that cars will not be abundant in cities, that in fact there will be very few cars, so we are now left with empty parking lots. I'm wondering, first who owns them, and how can you guys help utilize them to make them into food forests? How do you use your persuasive skills to do that? And really take over cities to make it a much more livable, greener place, which can include food forests, and it can take parking lots and turn them into indoor vertical gardens, whatever, or rooftop.
Or beekeeping for that. I was just in Detroit.
And urban farming is a multi-billion-dollar industry that we could utilize technology. The days are coming where you are not going to go to a supermarket to purchase your vegetables and your fruits. You're going to grow them in your home. Some of the things we're doing at the new lab in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the inventions are remarkable. This is not the antiquated method of using rooftop gardens. The hydroponic and some of the skills are just unbelievable. So we're moving to a different level of growing food, not only in spaces like parking lots, but also right in your own home. You're going to be able to beautify your home with fresh vegetables. And so we're moving in that direction. But as food writers, as many of you are, we have to move from living to eat and eat to live. We have to shift the conversation. And I get frustrated with my environmentalists who are engaged in this conversation about greenhouse gases when the real culprit of what's destroying our planet is the fact that our overconsumption of meat and beef. That is why they're burning the Amazon. They're burning it because they need to have cattle feed and chicken feed. And the amount of greenhouse gases that comes from animal waste and animal gases, that's destroying our environment. But no one wants to talk about that because of the money that's coming from the meat and dairy issue. Why are we serving our babies chocolate sweet milk in schools? Why are we spending millions of dollars on childhood obesity, childhood asthma, childhood diabetes with the Department of Health, but we're feeding them 960,000 meals that causes childhood diabetes, childhood asthma, and childhood obesity? So we have to get out of this schizophrenic state of talking about living healthy and actually doing it. It's not only about saving our mothers, but it's about saving our mother planet, Mother Earth, and we're not doing it.
Chloe, if I may, very quickly, you bring an interesting point. We don't tend to look at, the food industry is a billion-dollar industry, multi-billions of dollars, if not more, especially in the city, especially in my borough. In terms of space, with the parking lots, that becomes trickier because it depends on who owns them. And for instance, the New York Yankees, who I'm fighting with a little bit these days, even though I'm sad they didn't make the World Series.
Yeah. Seems to be some humming in my microphone.
But once upon a time in my borough, we had rubble and urban decay. And then you had the community gardens, and then everybody wanted to build. So one of the things that we've been doing, at least with those plots of land, is that we've been, protecting them. But then we're making them more viable, right? We're bringing more and more programs and students and having them work with schools. But how do you make them financially sustainable? So now what we've been doing, there's something called the Bronx hot sauce.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up.
Huh? So what we've done, going back to what Eric says, you got to be creative. Developer came to me a couple of years ago. Out of all the things that we negotiated, I said you have to work with the community garden that's going to be right across the street from your new building. What we had them do is that they purchased serrano peppers. And they they purchased the peppers, gave them to the community garden, had the community garden grow them, and then bought them from the community garden. And then that developed a cycle. So and then from there they got a chef. They created something called the Bronx hot sauce. It's delicious. You guys should order it. Fresh Direct carries it as well. Shameless plug. But we need to do more of that and show, at least on a micro level, that this local economy can work by doing more and more negotiations like what we did.
I just want to say in Manhattan, we don't have a lot of vacant space, but the ones that do exist, obviously community gardens, and there are hundreds of them, are doing what you say. However, we do have to also focus on the New York City Housing Authority. And there are some wonderful programs that are literally taking housing authority area, which exists, instead of building infill on it, which is another whole topic. We would prefer to have gardens, and there are some fabulous gardens, and then you work really directly with the residents and change the cooking habits and end up with fresh fruits and vegetables. So NYCHA is a place with 400 to 600,000 residents to focus on in terms of the gardening, and then the other one, as we heard, are the schools. Even my senior centers now have gardens. And the seniors are phenomenal gardeners. But I don't know that it's scalable. In other words, I'm looking to work with the upstate farmers because I want the city to purchase. And I think no matter how many gardens we have here, we can't do the 1.1 million students and et cetera being the second largest purchaser in the United States.
So we have time for one more question, and I want to come back to something we haven't really talked about too much yet on this panel. The city committed to becoming zero waste to landfill by 2030, and I want to know, how is this progressing in your borough, and what are some of the early successes you've seen so far?
Zero waste in the
Zero waste?
And obviously we're asking because food waste is a huge contributor to greenhouse gases. Again, to your point, I think it would be the third largest emitter behind US and China globally, if it was a country.
Listen, we're still hungover from celebrating the closure of the Fresh Kills landfill.
I think that, as Rubén indicated, we can't only talk about it, we have to be about it, to throw out those high ideas without putting in the infrastructure. And particularly in Brooklyn, where 47% of my residents speak a language other than English at home. If we start building into our educational structure on how to move, to carry, getting rid of plastic, my young people are really mobilized around getting rid of plastic bags. There are things we can do that we can hit those real numbers to move towards zero waste. But we have to really build the infrastructures to do so, and I don't see them in place right now.
I see the best way that we can move forward as a city is start with the restaurant industry. And we can do so in a way where we don't have to penalize the consumer. We can incentivize the business owners or the property owners. I just saw last week in Manhattan, there's here, Gale, I'm giving you props. I like Manhattan.
He likes Manhattan.
Yeah.
I wonder why.
There's a restaurant now that is going zero waste. Mm-hmm. And I think more so, I was thinking to myself that more so than just a complimentary or a nice news story, a news hit, this is something that should be celebrated, something that should serve as a catalyst, and that restaurant owner should be incentivized and should be worked with, and then have that person sort of work and sit with other restaurant owners and let them know how they went about it.
I have three suggestions. There's this wonderful place in Staten Island called Pratt Industries. And Pratt does the food boxes for every pizza, every Amazon box. Every time you take your paper from almost any borough, and it goes to Staten Island. It's phenomenal. So in Manhattan, what we're doing is having competition. Pratt is paying for actual dollars to be given to nonprofits that do the right thing. So one community board against another, or actually competing against yourself, so that you have to recycle more in the borough. So we're in that middle of this paper challenge for another year. Please recycle is what the message is, because we're only doing 50% of what we can. Number two, this organics. As Rubén indicated, it's a big problem, believe it or not, in the schools. I keep going back to the schools because they are so huge. So we started on the Upper West Side with moms making sure that the organics went into the right bin in the kitchen. And then with their craziness, I remember the sanitation commissioner, oh, we're going to go citywide. Well, there was no education. So literally, as we sit here today, some of the schools are putting organics into the organics bin, but it's being compromised. And so it's going to the landfill. It's not going to the places where it could be reused. So organics, as you heard from the restaurant, is a big, big challenge. The restaurant should be doing it, the school should be doing it. We do it on some blocks, but it's not done and that's the heavy stuff. Finally, I just want to mention something called passive house. It goes back to the housing, but we have to have buildings that are healthy. We have to have buildings that are doing zero waste. It's not just those of us who are doing it at school or at home or at work. And the passive house basically says the entire building is zero waste.
Well, thank you guys so much. I think that's all the time we have. But I know this is such an engaged audience. Tweet them, come to them after. There are a lot more questions in the audience. Thank you all so much.